West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Today, the United States Supreme Court ruled emphatically against affirmative action. This ruling effectively bans the diversity programs as they are currently operated, meaning what we know as affirmative action is now over, ending, dead, in public universities and other private colleges around the country. This ruling ends that program. It ends it at basically all public institutions, and we'll get into how the force of this ruling will affect people's lives, but guarantee it will affect you or people you know or students that you know in your life. 6 justices today voted to end the long-standing civil rights policy. The ruling came down in cases that involved 2 basically elite colleges, Harvard and the University of North Carolina. Republican appointees on this court declared the policy, which, to be clear, has been legal and constitutional and quite common for many decades in America, is now, as of today, as of this ruling today, it is now unconstitutional discrimination. Justice Roberts called it illegal discrimination. This is another sea change in a court that continues to upend rules in very specific areas. Not all their precedents, but very recently, and Nicole Walls and I just touched on this, in the areas of civil rights and women's rights, and often turning against longstanding precedents to get where they want to go. This ruling asserts that these changes are now, in the view of these members of the court, required by the text of the Constitution. And I will report for you tonight the new passages that are governing and binding law in America. In other words, this is the system. There's no further appeal past the Supreme Court. This is the law. And I'll share with you what that means. We also aim to tell you exactly the context for what's happening in our country right now. And I will also get into not only their impact and not only what the court says, but the obvious reality that what has also changed is what you see on your screen, the court's composition. 3 justices appointed by Donald Trump, you see some of them there, and when he announced them. And those new members of the court, more than anything else that you can find in the text of the Constitution or the law, is what changed. In other words, political change, not legal change. And those Trump appointees have hardened the conservative bloc on this court. Now, to be clear, Justice Roberts has long opposed what are often called the remedial measures that drive modern civil rights policy in America. And this is not law school. I'm not going to go into all the weeds of it, but I'm going to simplify it and summarize it by saying that when the American system, through Congress and through its institutions like schools, has tried to address these problems, it has done so through federal oversight, through federal programs on the government side, the oversight of southern states, for example, dealing with attacks on voting rights and racism. But it was Roberts who used his position on the court to first undercut MLK's Voting Rights Act. He argued there, and this is relevant tonight, he argued there that the federal medicine had become worse than the disease. Now today, it is Roberts leading this more conservative Trump wing of the court to try to summon that logic to colleges today. And they are arguing that considering diversity at all itself is worse than the original discrimination that those diversity policies seek to mend. And to be clear, that position, which is now law, cuts against what a lot of Wall Street and corporate America, institutions, universities, the military, what a lot of institutions do. Roberts states that Harvard's affirmative action literally violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, and the programs employ race in what he calls a negative manner, and he asserts, quote, involve racial stereotyping. The argument here is that if you look at a place that has been largely white or male, maybe the majority of its entire history, a place like Harvard, and you say we want to be more aware of diversity, remedially, as I mentioned, to address that past discrimination, and for the future, to have a diverse student body, that Roberts says, is the racism. That's against equality. Quote, the entire point of the Equal Protection Clause is that treating someone differently because of their skin color, he writes, is not like treating them differently because they are from a city or a suburb, or because they play the violin poorly or well. Roberts basically writing that the universities did not carry their burden to prove their process was valid. Quote, it is far from evident how assigning students to these racial categories and making admissions decisions based on them furthers the educational benefits that the universities claim to pursue, end quote. That right there is the court basically telling the universities that they cannot run their own admissions and education programs the way they choose because the court has deemed them discriminatory. Now, again, that's the argument, and I'm showing you what the court said, and this will bind all universities. I will also tell you the problem for them with that argument is the people signing on to that opinion do not have a record in court cases in their judgments, or really in the rest of their public lives, of advocating civil rights or voting rights, or being taken seriously caring about the rights of minorities and women minorities who deal with the extra intersectional discrimination in these fields. These are judges who are using the language of equality, of the 14th Amendment, of a colorblind America, to join a movement that nobody thinks they're a part of, because these are not civil rights advocates in the racial sense. That's just a fact. Now, Chief Justice Roberts and these other Trump judges have also basically gone down a road that was just discussed here with the president and Nicole Wallace, which is reversing precedent. And there's real life impacts here. Now, affirmative action has already been eliminated at the local level by certain states. In other words, just as Harvard chooses to do it, some states have chosen not to do it. But that also has given us data on what happens. For example, the end of affirmative action in certain states led to a drop in minority enrollment at the top public universities in those states. Experts tell the New York Times the number of, for example, black students could drop to levels not seen since the 1960s at these selective colleges. Again, these are diversity programs that have been legal and used for many decades. In fact, when you hear talk about law and precedent, as recently as 2016, just within a decade ago, this was upheld in a form, not 100%, but basically a version of affirmative action was still upheld by the Supreme Court. And the other thing I want to tell you before we bring in our experts, and we have some civil rights leaders to respond tonight, is that we're not talking about something that is currently controversial. We saw the court enter into the abortion and Roe debate at a time when many of these issues had already been sort of worked out, and it sort of threw them back into crisis and controversy. We may see that again today. I cannot predict for you what will happen tomorrow or the reaction to this ruling, but I can tell you that for decades, a compromise has been worked out for affirmative action in competitive and elite institutions. Most schools, it's not an issue because most schools don't have this level of restriction. But when you get to West Point, where there's a carve-out we'll get to later in the show, or Harvard, you're making fine-grained distinctions because many more people could pass Harvard than are allowed to go to Harvard. And so you start picking and choosing. Not picking and choosing who can pass, but picking and choosing who gets to go there. It's in those areas where affirmative action and diversity has been so key, along the lines of race, geography, gender. And it is in that area now that we're seeing the court say, no, dead end. As for the history, we've had bipartisan coalitions for this. As I mentioned, Wall Street, the Supreme Court reaffirming it. This started back in '78 and recurred until the Trump justices got on this court. It recurred multiple times over the decades.
The Supreme Court of the United States ruled on two questions of decisive importance to all Americans.
Affirmative action is not dead, but has to be part of an overall program to diversify a student body.
Tonight, the Supreme Court has spoken. They have ruled affirmative action is here to stay, at least for now.
It's upholding the affirmative action at the University of Texas, Brian. It's a 4-3 decision.
I'm pleased that the Supreme Court upheld the basic notion that diversity is an important value in our society.
Over and over and over, the Supreme Court has upheld the basic precedent, and we are living through a very tough time for the Supreme Court. Some of the most withering pushback came from within the court. Justice Jackson, with a scathing dissent that talks about some of the issues I alluded to, that the conservative arguments here may not hold up. Quote, with let them eat cake obliviousness, today the majority pulls the ripcord and announces, quote, colorblindness for all, but deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. And having so detached itself from this country's actual past and present experiences, the court has now been lured into interfering with the crucial work that institutions of higher learning are doing to solve America's real-world problems, she writes, summarizing the ruling and its impact as a perverse, ahistorical, and counterproductive outcome that is a tragedy for us all. Justice Sotomayor, writing the devastating impact of this decision, cannot be overstated. When you look at what we're hearing here from within the court, it is, well, quite harsh. Some justices reading their dissents from the bench, one of the rare ways that they sort of mark an extra strong dissent. We're dealing with a very ugly history that we've all lived through. Racism appears in many forms and many ways in this country and around the world. But America's specific problem is not just racism like bigotry or fighting among groups. America's problem, and we've talked about this many ways, and here we are tonight talking about the Supreme Court apparently blind to it in a week where we're hearing about blindness and colorblindness. America's specific problem is being a government and a alleged democracy founded on racism, state-sanctioned, and stitched into the very fabric of our founding documents. The Three-Fifths Compromise, the racism of slavery, the 14th Amendment, finally brought to address, allegedly, some of these issues being cited today by the people against any consideration of race and diversity. So the problem is not just how we deal with each other, although there is that. The problem is deeper in whether we have a government that can actually deal with these issues so that we might yet one day transcend them.
It is Friday, the 30th of June of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the diner of life. Yes. Somewhat of a liquid diet today, not in celebration, maybe in mourning. I don't know. Everything is upside down, isn't it? Diversity is discrimination. You would expect some frat boy Federalist Society Heritage Foundation, I don't know, dweeb, ruling that way, wouldn't you? Jeez. Better tell Squee. So, to build on that, I raised my head out of the information bubble, as once again, to do this salon. Sometimes we just have to stop the information from coming in. But I lifted my head because our rulings came down, and it looks like that fabricated case of a web designer who went all the way to the Supreme Court so that they would not have to do any work for LGBTQ plus people sometime in the future. No one ever came to the person to build a web design. The web designer doesn't even do weddings or whatever it is that they don't want to have to do for, LGBTQ plus people. Pretty much a fabricated case. There was no damage to give relief to, except for some minority report fear that in the future, when they might have that kind of a company. See, I'm not even sure they're a web designer, to be honest with you. All right. So we've got diversity is discrimination, and the MAGA SCOTUS just ruled essentially that not being a bigot is the real bigotry. Everything's turned around. All right. Yeah. We have a constitutional right to be bigots. But that whole equal protection due process for all only applies to the legacies, All right? And we know what that means, because as soon as there's enough, shall we say, people of color who are legacies, they'll stop that right now. And this is the other, there's actually many things that bother me about not just this web designer case they just ruled on, but the affirmative action case that I'm still stewing over. And I'll be stewing over the web designer case. Just give me some more hours today. And, of course, we got the whole weekend ahead of us, too, to stew. But I've had more time to stew over the affirmative action case. And there's a few things that bother me, but a couple that are paramount outside of it having no basis in reality. But there is no basis in reality. If you got some entitled white people telling you that diversity is the real discrimination, I wonder what that means. But a couple. One is that Ketanji Brown Jackson? I'm always messing up. Anyway, she was on the Harvard Board of Overseers. She recused herself. Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny, is on the board of two groups that brought the get rid of affirmative action cases to the Supreme Court. Because he was on a mission from the very moment he set foot in public life. Because once again, this is somebody who has the ability to just shoot madly through a closed door because there's something fearful on the other side. He thinks that because affirmative action gave him an opportunity in which to get into educational institutions he would never have gotten into otherwise, instead of the inherent systemic racism that would have kept him out of those institutions, he thinks it was the leg up that was, I don't know, the bad thing? That is why he never felt he was really a part of white society? Because he thinks white people looked at him and said, oh, it was because of affirmative action that you were here? No, that's not it. What is behind the idea that affirmative action is the reason that somebody lesser is allowed to be among us great people? And then you look at their great people with their Ivy League educations, and you got G.W. Bush, and you got Ron DeSantis, and any other number of slew of whatever. And Clarence Thomas wants to be a part of that. And he's mad because he always felt left out. I wonder why, Clarence. All right. No wonder this guy sees nothing wrong with his wife being on the board of two institutions or groups bringing court cases before his court with him on it, and not recusing, and any other number of, I don't know, gifts unreported. Now, is it affirmative action that the kid that he adopted, in quotation marks, who got his tuition paid for by Harlan Crow, was there any affirmative action in that, Clarence? Do you think kids are going to be looking at that kid? I guess he's not a kid anymore, but would have said, oh, that guy just got a leg up because Harlan Crow got him in here. No, they're going to be inherent systemic racists. Why don't we attend to that, Clarence? Jesus Christ. All right. Some people are bought off for not very much. Other people hold out so they can be bought off for a lot more. Is that the kind of representative democracy we're supposed to have? No, that is not representative democracy. That is inherent in right-wing fascist movements. Abject corruption. Corruption of the heart. Corruption of the soul. Corruption of the mind. But it's Antifa that's the evil. No wonder they think Antifa is the evil. Because we don't want them to, I don't know, ram their corruption down our throats. Content of character? Give me a break. They want to be judged by the content of their character, and their character sucks. You can't say that our character sucks. Yeah, you're a deplorable bigot. Give me a break. It's Friday. I'm ranting. Haven't even had one French 77. Virtually or otherwise. Should I? Well, it is the day for it. Okay. Don't drink in moroseness alone. Have a group of fellow people in morose. See, I just turned it into a verb. Okay, what do we have in store for you and the rest of the show here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy as we begin in the Bistro Cafe? All right, an Iowa judge blocked the state from attempting to prevent election officials from offering non-English voting materials to the public. We got to have some kind of good news on Friday. The Department of Justice accused Los Angeles County of repeatedly violating the Americans with Disabilities Act at polling places during recent elections. And a fugitive on the run for his role in the January 6th insurrection was arrested with weapons near Obama's Hawaii home after Trump posted the former president's address on social media. He doxed Obama. After the break, we move to the chef's table where China's manufacturing contracted in June as export orders decreased. And Ukrainian emergency workers held drills to prepare for radiation leaks from a Russian-held nuclear plant. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page from that chat room link, to the left near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, and down just a skosh. Yes, we're going to popularize that word once again. Was it ever popular? I don't know. But down just a skosh is the link to our Patreon page. And please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio because, well, to be honest, we need the help. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, it really does help. And please do. And thank you to those of you who have. Thank you. It really has helped. These bills keep coming, and they keep coming in ever-increasing amounts. How dare they? Anyway, thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom, for taking care of that and a lot more. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, at Justice Putnam, of course. And I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime. And you can always find those show notes and links by following my social media feed, and then it'll take you to the Daily Coast Diaries, and then you can read the actual articles at the links provided there, because that's how we do it. You can also follow this show on Twitter, such as it is, at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by Spreaker, not Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fine Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, yes, a liquid diet, is by Clark Kaufman from the Iowa Capital Dispatch. An Iowa judge has blocked the state from attempting to prevent election officials from offering non-English voting materials to the public. Under the ruling, Iowa counties will again be allowed to provide citizens with non-English ballots, voter registration forms, and absentee ballot applications. The decision dissolves a 15-year-old injunction that blocked the practice. The ruling was handed down in a lawsuit that was filed on behalf of the League of United Latin American Citizens of Iowa, known as LULAC, and the lawsuit challenged the state's application of the English Language Reaffirmation Act to election materials. The act, which was signed into law by Governor Tom Vilsack in 2002, requires that all political documents from the state shall be in the English language, unless materials are deemed necessary to secure the rights guaranteed by the Constitution. In 2003, the Iowa Secretary of State's office began to make non-English voter registration forms freely available online. Steve King, then a conservative Republican member of Iowa's congressional delegation, he's still a conservative, extremist. Well, he filed a lawsuit arguing the practice violated the state's English Language Reaffirmation Act. A district court judge agreed and issued an injunction in 2008 that barred the Secretary of State from providing voter registration forms in any language other than English, because look at the cabs on those illegal immigrants. That's Steve King. He was known for expressing, his disdain for workers of color. But in doing so, the court noted that the parties in the case had not addressed a central provision of the law specifically allowing the use of any language for documents that are necessary to secure rights guaranteed by the Constitution. This exception may justify the use of non-English voter registration forms, the court noted. In the wake of that ruling, the Secretary of State and the Iowa Voter Registration Commission stopped providing voting materials in languages other than English. LULAC of Iowa objected, arguing the action was damaging to its efforts to mobilize Latino voters. In June of 2021, the organization submitted a petition to the Secretary of State's office asking for a declaratory order regarding the dissemination and use of voting materials that were translated into Spanish. In September of 2021, the Secretary of State's office issued a one-sentence statement that said the injunction prevents the dissemination of official voter registration forms for this state in languages other than English. LULAC sued Iowa Secretary of State Paul Pate, the Voter Registration Commission, and 4 county auditors, asking the court to dissolve the injunction and issue a declaratory order stating that voting materials are exempt from the Iowa English Language Affirmation Act. The defendants argued that in 1959, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld English language literacy tests used by some states to limit voting, but they did not address the fact that 6 years later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 banned the use of any test or device to deny individuals the right to vote, including any requirement that a potential voter demonstrate the ability to read, write, understand, or interpret any matter. That provision of the Voting Rights Act was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court and struck down state-imposed literacy tests. On Thursday, Polk County District Court Judge Scott D. Rosenberg, that was yesterday, cited the Voting Rights Act while ruling in LULAC's favor, dissolving the injunction and stating that voting materials were exempt from the restrictions imposed by Iowa's Language Reaffirmation Act. Rebecca Ellis of the Los Angeles Times brings us this next offering here, the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. The U.S. Department of Justice has accused Los Angeles County of repeatedly failing to ensure that voters with disabilities can get into polling places and vote centers and cast their ballot during recent elections. In a federal complaint filed yesterday, Thursday, the department alleged the county routinely violated the ADA and risked disenfranchising Angelenos with vision and mobility disabilities. Since 2016, the DOJ has regularly surveyed county voting locations and ballot drop boxes during elections, according to the lawsuit. Each time it said it found places that don't meet standards set by the ADA. Prosecutors said that even though federal officials brought shortcomings to the county's attention, local officials failed to fix them, which repeatedly hampered residents' ability to vote. The alleged problems include a lack of accessible parking for vans and steep ramps without handrails. Voting is a fundamental right, and we will do everything we can to ensure that it is not limited or denied to anyone in our community, said U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada in a statement. Through this lawsuit, we demand that Los Angeles County afford individuals with disabilities an opportunity to participate in the county's voting program that is equal to that provided to non-disabled individuals. The lawsuit cites a voter who uses a wheelchair, referred to only as DG, who said she struggled to access a polling place located at a Chatsworth senior facility during the August 2019 special election. Davies of the Washington Post brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A man sued over his role in the January 6th riot was arrested yesterday, Thursday, with firearms in his van near the residence of former President Barack Obama, according to a law enforcement official. Taylor Taranto, age 37, was detained on an arrest warrant. D.C. police said he had been charged as a fugitive from justice, though they did not specify the underlying details of the case. The official who described the weapons did so on the condition of anonymity because the investigation remains ongoing. The arrest occurred about 2 p.m. in the 2400 block of Kalorama Road Northwest when Secret Service officers found Taranto and detained him. D.C. police then sent a specialized unit to perform a sweep of his van, which was found near the location of his arrest. The police department said in a statement that there is no active threat to the community, and this incident remains under investigation. It was unclear whether the Obama family was home at the time. On a side note, not mentioned in this article, is that the fellow went to the Obama home only because Donald Trump doxed the Obamas and published their address with instructions on how to get there on social media. Thanks, Donnie. All right, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, back in a flash. It's time for The Flash, another DCU movie, which means two things. One, the male filmmakers will shorten Wonder Woman's battle skirt another few inches. Seriously, at this point it's more a low-hanging belt than a skirt. And two, the DCU will find another way to make their heroes the main villains because, once again, the people behind the Detective Comics cinematic universe hate their heroes. I know you saw General Zod in the trailer. Trust me, he's just side dressing. The real threat to the multiverse, and I still hate multiverse stories, is the Flash himself. But let's give the Flash the benefit of the doubt. As I intimated in my Spider-Man Across the Multiverse review, maybe what we're seeing now is not just a self-serving canny bid to exploit nostalgia to leverage long-term intellectual property owned by corporations who have successfully lobbied Congress to extend the length of copyright laws in order to maintain their exclusive control over still profitable intellectual content. Maybe what we're seeing is a new postmodern hip-hop inspired, or at least analogous, narrative form that rejects the belief in the new idea or original storyline, except for the rare freak occurrence, and fully embraces the idea that all plots are just a reapplication of formulas and tropes. Thus, they are honored by the sample and made relevant by the remix. Through that lens, The Flash is really well done. Finding that he can go back in time, Barry Allen does so to make his mom not be dead, but he can't beat the butterfly effect and either creates or shifts into a world without a Superman, which is modern-day Tim Burton's 1989 Batman. So yay, Michael Keaton Bruce Wayne is back to teach Ezra Miller's Barry what he refused to accept from Ben Affleck Bruce, that we must honor the traumas that have molded us rather than enshrine them, thus letting them define us, which is not a new storyline, but still a worthwhile one. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest old, 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There's several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
In 2012 in the United States, about 317,000 motor vehicle crashes involved a large truck. 26,000 truck drivers and their passengers were injured in these crashes, and about 700 died. Trucker safety requires an alert, buckled-up, experienced driver with a reliable vehicle and a strong employer safety program. Seatbelts are the most effective way to prevent an injury or death in a motor vehicle crash, but in 2013, 1 in 6 drivers of large trucks didn't use their seatbelts. Employers can help truck drivers stay safe by committing to driver safety programs at the highest level of leadership, establishing and enforcing driver safety policies, including requiring everyone in the truck to buckle up, and addressing factors that contribute to crashes, such as drowsy and distracted driving. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
Wake up and text. Text and eat. Text and catch the bus. Text and miss your stop. Wait. Text and be late to work.
Sorry, I'm late.
Text and work. Text and pretend to work. Text and act surprised when someone calls you out for not working.
Who, me?
Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi. Oh, hey.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
The Senate has confirmed the first Muslim female federal judge in U.S. history.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
The first Muslim female federal judge and the first Bangladeshi-American judge is Nusrat Chaudhry. Since 2020, Ms. Chaudhry has served as the legal director of the ACLU of Illinois. From 2008 until 2020, she served at the National ACLU office, 7 years as the deputy director of the ACLU's Racial Justice Program. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer described Chaudhry as a shining example of the American dream. She is the daughter of immigrant parents, a graduate of Columbia and Princeton, and Yale Law School. After law school, she clerked for a U.S. District Court judge and then at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. She's also served on the Presidential Task Force on Building Trust in the American justice system. Chaudhry has led litigation to protect immigrants from dangerous detention conditions. Her team advances gender equity and the rights of children in foster care and young people in juvenile detention, as well as First Amendment rights and governmental transparency. She is expert in voting rights. The confirmation vote? It was basically along party lines. 49 opposed, 50 in favor. Judge Chaudhry will sit in the Federal District Court in Brooklyn. Congratulations, Judge.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1885. That was the day that streetcar workers went out on strike. The West Division Street Railroad Company had reduced the number of trips it made each day. The workers asked for a wage increase to make up for the loss of earnings. In response, management fired 15 union leaders. Outraged members of the city's labor movement rallied to the cause of the West Side Streetcarmen's Benevolent Association. Thousands of Chicagoans lined the company's tracks. Calls went out to revoke the company's charter. Mayor Harrison urged the company not to try and run their cars in the charged environment. But the company's management refused to listen. They demanded police protection to get their streetcars running. A police captain by the name of John Bonfield was assigned the task. Bristling with policemen, 10 streetcars rolled out into the crowd. Under Bonfield's orders, the police clubbed strikers and protesters along the tracks. When a group of bricklayers yelled "rats" at the passing cars, they were arrested. In all, 150 protesters went to jail that day. After 7 days, the strike ended in a compromise. The workers saw an increase in their wages, and all but 2 of the workers who had been fired got their jobs back. The action propelled Captain Bonfield's career as a strikebreaker. He became known as Captain Blackjack Bonfield. It was Captain Bonfield who led the police confrontation with workers at a rally the next year that sparked the Haymarket tragedy. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is 62 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs around 100 or more. We continue with an active heat advisory because we're only going to get hotter tomorrow. Looks like we'll have sunny skies throughout the day. Winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight, lows around 60. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Then mainly sunny tomorrow with highs in the upper 90s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10. Grass pollen remains high here in the little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is good at 20 parts per million, and that daytime UV index remains very high at level 9, so please do take care. Barometric pressure has just started to fall at 30.03 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 76%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's the Weather Underground. Get it? Anyway, the weather station just near London is registering 64 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 76 and sunny. Rome is 84 and partly cloudy with a thunderstorm advisory. Kyiv is 75 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 75 and clear. Hong Kong is 85 and fair. Tokyo is 80 degrees and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 45 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 55 and partly cloudy with a small craft advisory on the bay because of heavy wind. And New York, New York is 80 degrees Fahrenheit with a smoky haze and an air advisory to boot. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. China's factory activity contracted for another month in June as export orders decreased, adding to signs an economic rebound following the end of antivirus controls is cooling. A monthly purchasing managers index issued by the National Statistics Agency and an industry group edged up to 49 from May's 48.8 on a 100-point scale on which readings below 50 show activity contracting. The world's second-largest economy revived following the end in December of antivirus controls on travel and business activity, but that faded faster than expected due to lackluster consumer spending at home and weak demand for exports following interest rates hikes in the United States and Europe to cool inflation. Despite that, China's number 2 leader, Premier Jinping, said this week economic growth accelerated in the April to June period from the previous quarters of 4.5% rate. Li gave no details but expressed confidence China can hit the ruling Communist Party's annual growth target of about 5%. In June, a measure of new export orders fell to 46.4, down 0.8 points from the previous month, according to the National Bureau of Statistics and the China Federation of Logistics and Purchasing. A measure of employment also declined, while production and overall new orders increased. Growth in factory and consumer activity decelerated in May. Exports that month contracted 7.5% from a year earlier, and surveys found unemployment among young people in cities spiked to a record 20.8%.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mais automne, quand les feuilles tombent partout, si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Vasilisa Stepanenko of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Dressed in white and yellow protective suits and armed with devices to detect radiation levels, Ukrainian emergency workers took part in a drill to prepare for a potential risk of radiation leakage from the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I'm just going to call it ZAP for short. Dozens of civilians joined the drill on the outskirts of the city of Zap, located about 62 miles from the nuclear power plant, Europe's largest. You'd think I know how to pronounce it then. In a tent set up to provide first aid, emergency workers practiced hosing people down with soap and going through the motions of administering treatment to individuals who play-acted victims from possible radiation-affected areas. Russia occupied the plant in the early stages of the war. Over the past year, it has become a focal point of concern as Russia and Ukraine accuse each other of shelling the plant. Ukraine's military intelligence recently claimed, without providing evidence, that Russia is planning a large-scale provocation at the nuclear power plant in the southeast of the country. Last week, members of Zelensky's government briefed international representatives on the possible threat. Should something happen at the plant, the people would be brought from radiation-contaminated areas to a location where they would be given medical and psychological assistance. Next stop would be a temporary center where people would be washed to wipe away surface radiation, then transported to evacuation points. Larissa Mikhailovia, who took part in the drill, said while it made her anxious, she understands why it is being undertaken. Her family is already stocked up on large bottles of drinking water, stored food supplies, and purchased masks to prepare for a possible disaster. Last year, when a threat of an accident at the plant first arose, Ukraine established a crisis response headquarters. Thursday's drill was not the first time exercises were held. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.